A spring gale tears through the Golden Horn at dawn on April 13th, 1204, and in 3 violent hours it destroys the fleet that would have ended the Roman Empire. The ships of Venetian heavy transports and horse carriers lashed together in the narrow harbour, positioned for a final waterborne assault on Constantinople's sea walls. They have been here for months, these crusaders who set out to liberate Jerusalem and ended up besieging the largest Christian city on earth. The debts that brought them here are staggering. The Crusaders owed Venice 85,000 silver marks for a fleet built to carry an army 3 times the size that actually arrived. That unpaid debt became a leash, and the blind doge Enrico Dandolo, over 80 years old and utterly ruthless, used it to redirect the entire Fourth Crusade toward Venetian commercial interests. But what the doge could not control, what no amount of political cunning could anticipate, was the weather. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. In our timeline, the wind shifted favorably on April 12th, pressing the Venetian ships against the sea walls near the Blackernay Quarter, and Constantinople fell to the worst sack in medieval history. But winds in the Sea of Marmara are fickle in April. A sudden gale from the northeast, the kind that had already pushed the first assault back on April 9th, would not have been unusual. It would only have needed to be stronger and to last longer. The transports, top-heavy and packed close together in the Golden Horn, smash against each other and against the harbour chains. Masts snap. Hulls split. By midday, the fleet that Dandolo spent 2 years building is reduced to wreckage. The consequences of this single morning would ripple across 6 centuries. But first, we need to understand just how desperate the Crusader position had already become. Without a fleet capable of mounting a seaborne assault, the crusade is finished, and every baron in the army knows it. The land walls of Constantinople are the most formidable fortifications in the medieval world, triple rings of stone and ditch that have repelled every army that has tried them for 800 years. The sea walls were the weakness, and the Venetian ships were the only way to exploit it. With those ships broken, Boniface of Montferrat, the nominal Crusader commander, faces an impossible calculus. His army is running out of food. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios V. Mourtzouphlos, the usurper who strangled young Alexios IV and repudiated every promise made to the Crusaders, commands a garrison that outnumbers the besiegers. There is nowhere to forage. There is no relief coming. The negotiations are humiliating. Mourtzouphlos permits the Crusaders to withdraw, but his terms are deliberately punitive. Hostages from among the Crusader nobility, the return of relics looted during earlier skirmishes, a solemn oath never to threaten Byzantine territory again. Baldwin of Flanders, the man who in our timeline would have been crowned the first Latin emperor of Constantinople, instead boards a leaking galley as a defeated count returning home with nothing. The remnants of the fleet limp southward through the Aegean toward Crusader-held Acre. Pope Innocent III, who called this crusade in 1198 to recapture Jerusalem from the Ayyubid dynasty, and watched in impotent fury as it was hijacked to attack fellow Christians, receives the news with something between relief and despair. The expedition he never wanted has ended in failure. But Jerusalem remains in Muslim hands, and the resources that might have liberated it have been squandered on Venetian adventurism. Alexios V. Mourtzouphlos stands on the walls of Constantinople and watches the last Crusader sails disappear beyond the horizon. He has saved the city. Now he must save the empire. His position is precarious in ways that military victory alone cannot resolve. He seized the throne through murder. The strangulation of Alexios' fire was an open secret, and his legitimacy rests entirely on the prestige of having repelled the Latin invaders. The treasury is nearly empty, drained by years of civil war, and the ruinous promises that Alexios IV made to buy Crusader swords. The army is loyal but undersupplied. The aristocratic families of Constantinople eye the throne with the same hungry calculation that has produced 6 coups in the past 2 decades. Mourtzouphlos moves with the cold efficiency of a man who understands that hesitation is death. Rival claimants are arrested, blinded, or exiled to monasteries. The sea walls damaged during the earlier fighting are rebuilt with forced labor. Portions of the fleet are restored using timber that should have gone to the merchant marine. These are the actions of a soldier, not a statesman, and they buy time rather than stability. But time, in this moment, is enough. The empire that Mourtzouphlos holds together is diminished but intact. Constantinople's population still exceeds 400,000. The trade routes through the Bosporus still generate revenue. The bureaucratic apparatus that has governed the Eastern Mediterranean for nearly 1,000 years still functions. What matters is what does not happen. The city is not sacked. The libraries are not burned. The bronze horses of the hippodrome are not carried off to Venice. The relics that would have been scattered across Latin Europe remain in their reliquaries. The civilization continues. For Enrico Dandolo, the gale in the Golden Horn is more than a military setback. It is the destruction of a commercial strategy decades in the making. The sack of Constantinople would have delivered Venice, a colonial empire, 3/8 of the Byzantine capital itself, the island of Crete, key ports across the Aegean, and dominance over the trade routes connecting Europe to Asia. Instead, Venice has lost the core of its war fleet, thousands of sailors, and 2 years of investment, with nothing to show for it but a treaty of withdrawal signed under duress. Dandolo, who sailed with the fleet despite his blindness and his age, does not survive the humiliation. He dies within the year, and the republic he leaves behind must reinvent its commercial future. Venice pivots westward. Denied the Aegean and the Black Sea, Venetian merchants pressed deeper into the western Mediterranean, competing with Pisa and the coastal cities of southern France for control of the spice trade's western terminus. But the eastern vacuum does not go unfilled. Genoa, Venice's perpetual rival, recognizes the opportunity that Byzantine survival presents. A grateful Mourtzouphlos and the emperors who follow him grant Genoese merchants favorable trading concessions in Constantinople and the Black Sea ports. The rivalry between Venice and Genoa, which in our timeline intensified after 1261, begins decades earlier and with different geography. This competition reshapes Mediterranean commerce. The wealth that would have flowed through a Venetian-dominated Latin East instead flows through Genoese counting houses in Galata and Caffa. Venice remains powerful, but its golden age takes a different form, more Western, more territorial, and ultimately more entangled with the politics of the Italian peninsula. Without a Latin empire squatting in Constantinople, Pope Innocent III faces a simpler and more frustrating strategic landscape. In our timeline, the establishment of a Catholic emperor in Constantinople created the illusion that church reunion between Rome and the Orthodox East might be achievable by force. That illusion consumed papal energy and resources for decades, producing nothing but deepened enmity between the two halves of Christendom. In this timeline, no such illusion exists. The Orthodox Church remains firmly under the protection of a Byzantine emperor who owes his throne to having expelled Catholic invaders. Reunion is not merely unlikely, it is unthinkable. Innocent and his successors redirect crusading energy toward the targets that mattered most to them. The Fifth Crusade, launched in 1217, receives stronger papal support and better coordination than in our timeline, where the distraction of managing Latin Constantinople siphoned away attention and resources. The Crusaders achieved tactical victories in Egypt, perhaps even holding Damietta longer than the brief occupation of our history. But Jerusalem remains beyond reach. The Ayyubid dynasty and its Mamluk successors proved too resilient, the logistical challenges of projecting European military power into the Levant too severe. The Holy Land slips away regardless. Closer to home, the Albigensian Crusade against the Cathars of southern France proceeds much as it did in our timeline, with devastating thoroughness. The Papacy's energies, undivided by Eastern fantasies, concentrate on consolidating Catholic orthodoxy within Europe itself. The Inquisition develops, the mendicant orders expand, the medieval church becomes, if anything, more internally focused and more doctrinally rigid. Here the divergence begins to compound across generations, and its consequences grow enormous. In our timeline, the sack of Constantinople in 1204 shattered the Byzantine Empire into fragments: the Empire of Nicaea, the Despotate of Epirus, the Empire of Trebizond, each too weak to control Anatolia effectively. When Michael VIII Palaiologos recaptured Constantinople in 1261, he inherited a state that had lost most of its Anatolian heartland and could never recover it. The frontier that had held against Turkish expansion for centuries dissolved into a patchwork of petty lordships and abandoned fortifications. None of this happens in the timeline where the gale saves Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire retains its Anatolian provinces, not without difficulty, not without periodic losses, but as a coherent defensive system managed by a central government with the bureaucratic capacity and tax base to maintain it. When the Mongols sweep through Anatolia in the 1240s, shattering the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum at the Battle of Crusader in 1243, the aftermath unfolds differently. The Turkish beyliks that emerge from the Seljuk collapse, small, aggressive frontier principalities, push outward in every direction. But where they press westward, they encounter not the abandoned Byzantine borderlands of our history, but a functioning system of fortified cities, professional garrisons, and diplomatic networks backed by Constantinople's gold. The frontier holds. Not everywhere, and not without cost. Byzantine Anatolia contracts slowly over the 13th and 14th centuries, losing exposed salients and poorly defended valleys. But the core, the fertile coastal plains, the major cities, the road networks connecting Constantinople to the interior, remains under imperial control. The shield holds. The Ottomans still emerge. History is not so easily rewritten. Osman and his descendants build their beylik in the same corner of northwestern Anatolia, absorbing weaker neighbors through the same combination of military skill, religious legitimacy, and administrative competence that made them formidable in our timeline. The Ottoman genius for incorporation, for absorbing conquered peoples and rival warriors into an expanding state, operates regardless of Byzantine strength. But geography constrains what ambition demands. In our timeline, the Ottomans crossed into Europe in the 1350s through a Byzantine Empire so weakened that it could not defend its own capital, let alone the Dardanelles. The civil wars that consumed Byzantium after 1204 essentially invited Turkish expansion into Thrace and the Balkans. In this timeline, no such invitation exists. The straits remain under Byzantine control. The European shore remains fortified. The Ottomans, denied easy passage westward, turn their energies elsewhere, eastward against Turkmen confederations, southward against the remnants of Mongol successor states, inward toward the consolidation of Anatolian territory that in our timeline they acquired almost as an afterthought. This is not an Ottoman defeat. It is an Ottoman redirection. The state that emerges by the 15th century is powerful, centralized, and ambitious. But it is an Anatolian power, not a European one. Its wars are fought on the Iranian plateau and in the upper Euphrates Valley, not at Kosovo and Nicopolis. The Janissary Corps develops to fight steppe cavalry, not Balkan infantry. The Ottoman Empire grows, but it grows into a different shape. By the middle of the 15th century, Constantinople still stands. The city is diminished. Its population has declined from the heights of the 12th century. Its provinces have contracted. The emperors who sit on the throne bear titles grander than their treasury can support, but the walls hold. The Theodosian fortifications, triple rings of stone and ditch that have protected the city since the 5th century, remain unbreached. The Golden Horn chain still stretches across the harbor mouth. The great dome of Hagia Sophia still rises above a city that calls itself Roman and means it. In our timeline, on May 29, 1453, Sultan Mehmed II's army breached those walls with gunpowder and overwhelming numbers, ending 11 centuries of continuous Roman governance and sending shockwaves through European civilization. Greek scholars fled westward, carrying manuscripts that would fuel the Renaissance. Trade routes shifted. The age of exploration accelerated as Europeans sought new paths to Asia that bypassed Ottoman territory. The medieval world ended, and the modern one began. In this timeline, that rupture never comes. The medieval order holds its shape a little longer, not forever, because nothing holds forever, but long enough to matter. The scholars stay, the trade routes persist, the desperate search for alternative passages to India and China lacks the same urgency. The world still changes, because the world always changes, but it changes at a different pace and in a different pattern, shaped by the survival of an institution that connected the ancient world to the modern one. All of it traces back to a single morning in April 124, when the wind blew from the wrong direction at exactly the right time. Constantinople's history is full of moments like this, moments when geography and weather and chance intervened to preserve what human ambition sought to destroy. The city survived earthquakes, plagues, and a dozen sieges over its long life. On that April morning it survived one more, and the centuries that followed bent around its endurance like water flowing past a stone that refuses to move.